He said a few months. I did the calculation in my head of what those months had looked like from the outside. The dinners and the Sunday calls to Korea and Yuna's birthday video, and all the ordinary days he had spent finding a way to tell me while telling me nothing. And I stood up and went to our bedroom and locked the door and sat on the floor with my back against the bed and stayed there until I heard him go to the guest room and the house went quiet. In the weeks that followed, James and I existed in a state of frozen negotiation. Both of us still in the house, still performing normalcy for the children, but with a distance between us that we hadn't named yet, and that I didn't know how to cross or whether I wanted to. He was very careful with me during this period, attentive in a way that felt belated and therefore slightly painful, like something that should have come earlier and had arrived too late to feel like what it was trying to be. I called my mother in Korea, not to tell her everything. I couldn't do that to her, not across that distance, not when she had no way to come and there was nothing she could do but carry the worry. I called her because I needed to hear her voice, and because talking to her, even about ordinary things, reminded me of who I was before I became James's wife and Marcus and Yuna's mother, the person I had been in Tongyong with the cold mornings and the salt air, the oldest daughter who stayed quiet and worked hard and never asked for more than was given. And something about hearing her voice made me realize that staying quiet had been a decision I made at 23 that I had never actually revisited, that the habit of smallness, of accommodation, of asking for nothing, had served certain purposes in my life and had also cost me things I hadn't fully accounted for. That even my response to finding the phone, the 4 days of silence, the careful management of the revelation, the performance of normalcy for the children, was another version of the same thing, taking care of everyone else's experience of the situation before I had properly sat with my own. I started seeing a therapist. Her name was Dr. Kim, which I had not planned, but which turned out to matter more than I expected. Speaking Korean in that room when English didn't have quite the right words, which happened more than I had anticipated, became a way of accessing parts of myself I had left in another language. She asked me questions that nobody had asked me in years. What did I want my life to look like? Not James's life, not the children's life, mine. I sat with that question for a long time. 3 months after I found the phone, Marcus found out. Not from us. From something he saw on James's laptop that he hadn't been meant to see, which is the kind of thing that happens in houses where secrets are being kept and teenagers exist, because teenagers move through domestic space like water finding cracks. He came to me and not to James, which told me something about where his instincts placed his trust. He was 16 and furious in the particular way of teenage boys who have discovered that their parents are fallible humans. Not cold, not composed, but viscerally, physically angry in a way that broke my heart, and also quietly helped me understand something about my own anger that I had been managing too carefully. I told him the truth, as much of it as was appropriate for him to know. I told him that what his father had done was wrong, that it had hurt me, that we were trying to figure out what came next, and that he and Yuna were not going to be abandoned by either of us, regardless of what we decided. He was quiet for a long time, and then he said, "What do you want to do, Mom?" And I realized that was the same question Patricia had asked me and Dr. Kim had been working toward, and that I still hadn't fully answered it. What I wanted, I understood slowly over the following month, was not what I had expected to want. I had assumed before all of this that if something like this ever happened, I would leave, that it would be uncomplicated in that direction, that the line between before and after would be clear. But sitting inside the actual situation, with 2 children and 19 years and a life built across 2 cultures, and a man I had genuinely loved for most of those years, the decision was not clean. It was not simple. And I had spent enough time judging my own desire for things to be simple to finally stop doing that. James and I tried. For 8 months we tried, with a couples therapist who was direct and uncomfortable in the ways that good couples therapists are, who made both of us say things out loud that we had been keeping in the comfortable dark of not saying. There were sessions that ended with something resembling progress, and sessions that ended with me driving home alone because I needed 20 minutes in the car before I could be in the house. James was consistent in a way that I watched carefully for signs of performance versus reality, and that appeared over time to be genuine. He had ended the other relationship. He had told me the truth about things I hadn't asked, which was harder and more meaningful than answering direct questions. He was trying, and I was trying too. But I learned something in those 8 months that I think I needed to learn, which is that trying and choosing are not the same thing, and that I had spent a great deal of my adult life trying very hard at things I had never actually chosen. I had not chosen to leave Korea, exactly. I had chosen James, and Korea leaving had come with that. I had not chosen my smallness exactly. It had been handed to me in childhood, and I had never put it down. I had been trying at my own life without ever fully deciding it was mine. I asked James for a divorce in November, 11 months after finding the phone. Not in anger. The anger had moved through me and settled into something quieter and more permanent by then. Something I was learning to carry without letting it decide things for me. I asked because I had finally, honestly, asked myself what I wanted my life to look like. And what I saw when I looked at the answer didn't have him in the center of it. Not because I had stopped caring about him, because I had started caring about myself enough to be honest about what I actually needed. And honesty, it turned out, pointed somewhere new. He didn't fight it. I think he understood, in the way people understand things they've been fearing for a long time, that this was where we had been heading since the moment I put that phone on the coffee table. He cried again, and this time, the tears looked different to me. Less about being caught, and more about something genuinely ending. And I sat with him for a while before I left the room. What happened next is the part I didn't see coming, and I want to tell you about it because I think it is the most important part of everything. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, my mother called me from Korea on a Sunday morning at her usual time. She asked about the children, about work, about the Ohio weather, all the usual things. And then she said very quietly, "Grace, there is something I need to tell you." She told me that when I was a child, before I was old enough to remember, my parents had gone through something similar. Not the same, different circumstances, different time, different country, but a betrayal, a secret. A period of her life where she had to decide what she wanted without letting fear decide for her. She had never told me because she had thought it was her secret to keep. She was telling me now because she had listened to my voice for the last 11 months, and she understood that I was going through something she recognized, and she wanted me to know I was not the first woman in our family to have survived it. I sat on my kitchen floor in Cincinnati and listened to my mother tell me a story I had never known, and I understood as she spoke that the woman I had thought I knew, contained, dignified, always composed, had been a person navigating her own complexity for decades, and that her composure had not been the absence of difficulty, but the presence of something stronger. And I understood something about myself, about where my strength came from, about what I had been given that was worth keeping, and what I had been given that was worth putting down. I am still in Cincinnati. I kept the house. The children moved between me and James on a schedule we built carefully around their school and their lives and their feelings about all of it, which we continue to check in on regularly because they are humans having an experience and not logistics to be managed. Marcus is applying to colleges. Yuna has started playing the guitar and practices in the evenings. With a ferocious sincerity that fills the house with sound in a way I have decided to consider entirely wonderful, even when it's also entirely loud. I went back to school last year, enrolled in a graduate program in social work. which feels like the direction I was always moving toward and simply hadn't given myself permission to move toward yet. I drive to class 2 evenings a week, and I sit in rooms with people 20 years younger than me, and I take notes and ask questions, and I feel in that room like someone who's building something that is entirely and only hers. Some mornings I make coffee, and I stand at the kitchen window and I watch the street and I think about the girl in Tongyong, who was taught to stay quiet and ask for nothing and work hard and accommodate. And I feel something for her that took me a long time to arrive at. Not pity, something closer to tenderness. She did the best she could with what she had been given. And now I am doing the best I can with something more. The sea in Tongyong is a particular shade of gray-green in early morning that I have never seen anywhere else. I am going back this summer with the children to show them where I come from, the narrow streets and the fishing boats, and my grandmother who forgets and remembers in the same sentence. I want them to see the water that shaped me before I had words for what water does to a person. I want to stand at the edge of it and feel it the way I felt it when I was small, before I learned to make myself small to fit someone else's life. I am 44 years old, and I am just beginning to understand what I'm capable of. And that is not a sad thing. That is the whole point.